So we have sort of a wide range of experiences and things that we're going to talk about today with respect to the discipline of evaluation. But before we kind of get into that, we want to talk a little bit about who you are. So Nancy, if you want to get started.
Yeah, so just we wanted to get a general feeling of who you are, where you're coming from, what your discipline area is, and also what are you looking to get out of our session today. So
just go around.
Just briefly.
Hi, I'm Sarah Clifton. I'm a graduate student at Northwestern University in China. And what I want to get out of this is how to measure those sort of intangibles, how people feel, how much confidence they have for action class.
Great.
Hi, my name is Brian Tan. I'm from State College, Junior College, and what I want to get out of teaching chemistry and math, and what I want to get out of this workshop is how I can take the data that I do have from the class that I flipped and use that to evaluate how effective the course and present it to the administrators and things so we can just keep going forward.
Hello, my name is Jim Wolf. I'm at Eddy in the computer science department. And in general, evaluation, I find evaluation to be tough. And often the things where students or learn best are also the things that are interested correlated with balance, right? And so how do we actually know what's working or not? I think that's what I'm hoping to learn.
I'm Janice Lerner. I'm at Bates College, one of the local people. It's in Maine, just in case you were wondering. I teach math, and at Bates we're trying to do a lot of this sort of active learning and flipped classroom switch in all of our STEM courses, and so it would be interesting to bring some of this information back for like the other departments too, and see how we can evaluate whether the changes we're doing as a division are actually helping students or not.
Kevin Moore. I'm a faculty here in science in business, and so I'm mainly interested in sending. I've done some like content-based evaluations in my class. I'm more interested in learning how to do student affect or opinion, like their outlook on science type evaluations. Struggle.
Hi, my name is Neerja. I'm also a faculty of tech science and chemistry, and I am really interested in maybe how to design a whole research around this effectiveness of maybe traditional versus split, or how would you go about the whole design if I want to really come up with how to test the hypothesis that flipped classroom support.
My name is Barbara. I'm in biology, and I guess I'm in this workshop too to try to get a better idea of how to evaluate what's working. Well, our student evaluation that we try to flip, and so trying to make it something that they understand that they're learning from, maybe to convince them that it works.
Kevin Moore from James University Engineering. I've been flipping my class for the last 3 years. I just want to design an assessment tool to see if I'm doing it right.
Excellent.
I'm Tara Nelson from Portland Community College, and I think at the basic level, I just really want to know what are the tools that I need to know if my classroom is successful, and what I should repeat and not. And I'd also like to know from a larger perspective what kind of evaluation mechanisms need to be in place so that I can get support from our administration if I need it.
I'm an associate in College of Engineering. I'm here to learn everything because I want to support the faculty, further with evaluation, and using everything. So.
My name is Jane Liu. I teach chemistry, biochemistry at Hankel College, and I never flipped before, maybe some flipping, but I do a lot of active learning, collaborative learning in my classroom. I use the Cobblestone model, if you're familiar with that. And it's just this long-standing question of mine, which is, or to evaluate whether or not the things I try are working. I know I need to do this. I know I also don't know how to do this. Because I've never trained how to do this. And so I have lots of data. I don't know if it's the right data. I don't know what to do with the data. So if I learn a little bit about that, that would be great.
I'm a professor and director of learning and education for college engineering at Texas A&M College Education in Texas. And we do some research about what I use with the classes. I'm just curious to see what others do.
Francis Duke, Career Archivist in the Ethics Department, and I'm interested in finding out. I feel like when I evaluate what I'm doing in the classroom, I just make stuff up.
Thanks for being honest.
I kind of want to know what best practices are.
I'm Ron Mann. I'm the academic coordinator for the Math Department and Institute Design. We're piloting some of the classes in our first year pilot schools in the fall, and we're planning stage right now. So one of the things that we plan for how we evaluate if the one that is split versus one that is not split. So before we can have that in place, so we can
Right. Good. Great.
I'm Gordon Krause. I'm an engineering faculty here in London. And I'm actually inspired to come here because of a colleague who had a problem at a former institution where I worked. And he was constantly challenged with this classroom model. He got the students more involved. They were deeper thinkers about things and saw information and questions that he never saw before. And he would be challenged constantly by faculty chairs. Can you prove that this is any better than anything that was ever done before for a lot less money? And I want to see if you have good ways to evaluate how I can incorporate this.
My name is Eddy. I'm computer science and information technology. I have been classes in June, July, courses, and I will do more one of the other evaluation analysis for set up for the classes tomorrow.
I'm also from Computer College. I work in Japan, Information Technology Department. I'm an education technologist. Aside from whatever exactly what Joanna said, just to give an overview of evaluations as we move forward in our potential preparation for the class.
Okay.
One more.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Yes.
David Sather from Harvard in education technology. Just like see what we can do to help with practice.
Great, thanks. Before we kind of get rolling on things, just a kind of a disclaimer. So as you can probably appreciate, evaluation's a very wide discipline, right? There's a range of things that you could do in evaluation, and there's lots of different things. And essentially, it's a systematic way of investigating to what extent you have some kind of effective program or process or policy or whatever it is. So it would be impossible to do that in an hour and a half, right? To be able to go through the whole discipline of evaluation, tell you exactly what you need to know and move forward. But we hope maybe by the end of this, and maybe some individual questions or other things, other ideas that come up, maybe that will kind of inspire you to apply that to your own situation. And then if you have specific questions that we can help kind of hone that in, that's what we'll be doing more towards the end. So if you don't get sort of what you came here to get, then you can always follow up by email too. We'll make the slides available and other resources. We have a couple handouts too today. So some frequently asked questions of an evaluation included. So just as sort of a warning, if we don't cover what we need to cover to satisfy you in the next hour and 15 minutes, then certainly be available for follow-up. So Okay, all right, turn it over to Nancy.
Sure. So this is just a brief agenda of what we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about some of the research and evaluations that we found about flipped classrooms when we were working on our evaluation of the one here at Harvey Mudd. We are going to go briefly again through the evaluation results from our study, which were all of you in the opening session yesterday morning. Okay, so a lot of you will have context around what I'm going to talk about. And then Rebecca is going to talk more about this general evaluation concepts, and we're going to go through logic models and give you a chance to think about developing one for your particular situation. Okay, so as mentioned yesterday, a lot of the research that's currently out there about flipped classrooms is either given in conference presentations, or if it is published in journals, we found that it is not experimental research, it's not quasi-experimental research. A lot of it really has been published that's been focused solely on student attitudes. This is just a handful of the citations that we found related to the student attitude research, and as you can imagine, some of the things that people were looking at included how are students liking this format, what are they finding challenging about this format, looking at self-paced learning and how that works for students in classes, and then also ease of technology, quality of lectures, and professor responsiveness. We did come across a couple studies I wanted to mention, Day and Foley, which did demonstrate positive student outcomes for students who are in a flipped classroom compared to those in a traditional. They looked at homework scores, project scores, exam scores, and overall course grades. And then this Mason, Schumann, and Cook study was also comparing students who were in a flipped course to those in a traditional section for a control systems course. And again, looking at student quiz and exam performance, students in the flipped section perform better compared to students in the control or traditional classroom. So our project here at HMC was a controlled study in that we had people who were in flipped classrooms and people who were in traditional classrooms, and really tried to control what was happening in both of those sections to look as much as possible as the effects of both types of classes happening at one time. So we had, there we go, okay. We had several evaluation questions which we were looking to address. We always start with what are the questions that we're looking to answer when we're starting an evaluation project. Mainly we were looking at implementation in terms of how much time are people spending on active working with their instructors in both sections of the course, how are people participating for this course, and what are they doing to prepare for class, either through watching videos or using other materials. We looked at learning gains, we looked at transfer and ability to apply new material in new situations. We looked at metacognition and also faculty experiences. So in order to look at these things, implementation measure included we used a student survey to assess implementation, which mainly included student self-reports of behaviors and attitudes relating to this implementation of the two different course structures. We also looked at student outcomes for content, which either were developed by or chosen by the professor to use to assess various content areas. In math, for example, students completed a pre-test and a post-test that was developed by the professors. And then we also looked at homework and quiz scores. Nancy late yesterday mentioned several of the content assessments that she used, most of which she did not develop herself, but were chosen because they've been vetted and are highly reliable measures of the content area. Transfer of knowledge, we used to class projects in engineering, as well as specific questions on the math final exam to look at transfer of knowledge. Metacognition was embedded within a student survey, which was given to every student in all sections of the course, both flipped and non. And then student attitudes and satisfaction, we looked at surveys with both Likert scale questions as well as open-ended questions. And then faculty satisfaction was measured through faculty course reflections.
Yeah, I want to stop right there. Yeah, just take a look at that for a second, because I think it's important just to kind of note. So in evaluation, we really want to track implementation first and foremost, right? So how has the model been implemented? And we generally ask, is it with high quality and with fidelity to the original program plans, because unless you're really tracking the implementation, you really can't figure out if that is what's having the effect on any of these outcomes, right? So you want to be able to carefully monitor implementation both in control or sort of traditional settings as well as in the flip setting that you're doing. So that's kind of important to note first and foremost, that there's multiple ways of doing that. And if you want some more ideas or suggestions of how to do that, we can talk about it some more, but just at this point, just kind of note that that's a really important part of the process. And then the second part, they have several outcome measures, which you don't have to have 4 or 5 or 6 outcome measures. They were testing multiple evaluation questions or ideas in terms of transfer, metacognitive skills. Sometimes it's just a matter of, did the students learn more? Did they have higher scores on exams, or did they have higher grades or higher comprehension on some measures? So you can be fairly selective, especially if you're just doing this by yourself, piloting it for the first time, and you're selecting a measure, and maybe your final exam score that you're using, you're not having to create something else. But for the most part, as Nancy mentioned, you want to try to first and foremost think about what your question you want to answer, and then select measures appropriate to that.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so again, as we talked about yesterday, no consistent differences, significant differences were found between these flipped and traditional classroom settings, and we wanted to know why this is.
Is that the flipped versus the active learning classroom?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Correct.
So, sorry, when I say traditional, I'm talking a non-flipped course, yeah. Okay, so again, students at this school are high achieving across groups. That's just a general fact. Something else to think about is making your condition groups as distinct as possible when you're looking at 2 different settings. So especially for the math class, we found that there was little difference in between how the active learning class was implemented compared to how the flipped class was implemented, aside from when students were doing particular problems. And so in order to really be able to see those differences, you want there to be more of a distinct difference between what's happening in your groups. But we also found this past year, the engineering class, there were very distinct differences between what was happening in the flipped class and what was happening in the traditional class, and we still didn't find significant differences. And it seems to be that the key ingredient in here is that component of active learning. And so flipping alone is insufficient, basically, is what we've decided. So once we started looking at the research literature behind active learning, we realized that having students who are, engaged in the material and able to explain concepts to themselves and to instructors, that's really what's making the difference when you're looking at changes in student outcomes. So moving forward, the professors here are testing a hybrid model which combines the best of the traditional or active learning class with the best of the flipped class, and that's what we're going to be looking at for this year. So now Rebecca is going to, again, go back into this kind of zoomed out vision of what evaluation is.
Okay. Just as a quick sort of temperature in the room. So how many of you have worked with an external evaluator before or done evaluation yourself? How many of you follow? Okay. Yeah, so what has been your experience with working with an external evaluator, those of you who have done it? Any thoughts? Yeah.
What I found if evaluator is not continuously, so I work on a LSF plan.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in tune with the project, it's not aware what is going on. So I can take for examples. One example, evaluator was like once in 6 months we'll have a meeting and we'll away. It was a weird situation. So that turned out really, really bad.
Yeah.
The other one, so we learned our lessons.
Right.
Second time, the evaluator was part of every meeting.
Okay.
That turned out really good. So
Right. The level of engagement of the evaluator seems to be.
very important.
Sure, absolutely. I would completely agree with you. Yeah, we often get, I hate to say this because it's such a horrible statement about our profession, but we get a lot of referrals from people who have just fired their evaluator because they're completely dissatisfied with the work. because they're not paid, because they're never around, because they can't get to them, because they charge a lot of money and they do a lot of work or something. So just as someone who potentially, for each of you who are consumers of evaluators, if you're not going to do it yourself, again, you should know what should be required sort of professionally. Here's some just, in my view, some helpful hints to do and or to kind of keep in mind, and some things you should know. Like I said, we have sort of a frequently asked questions document too that I'll hand out. That some of this information's on our website too, but just as a hint for you to know how to actually sort of vet and evaluate someone who's an evaluator. Unfortunately, we don't have like a certification process in our profession, so anybody can call themselves an evaluator, which is sort of strange. But you know, we have a professional association, the American Evaluation Association, that we're sort of in tune with, and part of that association, there's professional practice standards and everything that we should abide by. So I would first and foremost start with, if you're interviewing someone or trying to assess someone, kind of talk about their own credentials or experience and that sort of thing. So just as an FYI. Okay, so I'm talking a little bit about what evaluation is. Perhaps you've heard some of this. Michael Scriven, who's a friend of mine, one of the founders of the field, we actually co-teach a class in evaluation methods together at right now for professional evaluators across the world. And he defines it as, in part, process of determining the merit, worth, or value of something or the product of that process. So it's sort of a general definition. There are different stages, of course, in evaluation. You're not always just determining merit or worth. Sometimes, especially early on, you're really doing some formative types of activities to be able to determine, okay, what's working, what's not working, kind of tweaking the process, and then you can determine sort of merit or worth later on in the process. So just to kind of keep that in mind. But I'll kind of go through some of these, like the importance and then the difference between evaluation research and some other subfields too, as a matter of fact. Okay, so in terms of why you include evaluation, and what my preference is, and probably what most evaluators would tell you, is that to begin from the very start of the process, like at the program design stage, or at the, you know, thinking about flipping your classroom in this case, you really want to think about the evaluation alongside the program design, right? Because you want to say, all right, we're going to use specific measures, we're going to answer specific evaluation questions. That should all be decided ahead of time before you're implementing anything. If you've already tried it, you've already done it a couple times, you haven't done formal evaluation, that's fine. You probably have a lot of insight into some of the things that you want to look at. But at the very least, we'd like to try to get on at the very beginning, because also we could recommend some, you know, maybe program design modifications too. I don't like to design programs for people. I think it's, I could probably be biased if I'm part of the design process too much, but we like to give you some hints about things we've seen before. We work with a sort of a wide range of clients. In evaluation, hopefully you can expect to get some understanding of what's actually working, what's not working, why it's not working, perhaps, hopefully. You'll get a good sense of, again, in the process of doing it, what are some good measures to be able to look at, what's feasible. You know, we always kind of talk about, you know, there's a cost to doing everything, right? So the money that you're spending out of the program grant for something, for the most part, is dedicated to maybe, you know, staff or faculty stipends or program activities or whatever you're doing. So any dollar that you're spending on evaluation, you're not spending on the meat of it, right? So you want to, in my view, you have to be pretty efficient about the dollars that you use for evaluation, even though they should be sort of a portion of the budget. You could be really efficient about that, just as sort of an ethical concern, because we realize, you know, there's a cost to being able to understand what's happening as opposed to just, you know, running the program without it. So I think that often the purpose of doing it for a lot of individuals, and they won't think of it initially, but they're often required to do it. Like NSF grants, lots of government funded grants, you have to do evaluation, right? It's a good chunk of the proposal points that you get to be able to include a good evaluation plan and that. And that's something that somebody who's a professional evaluator should help you write, as opposed to just sort of taking the best out of it, because they really do look at it and they really kind of critique it very carefully along the rest of the project plan. But it's really for accountability purposes. Hopefully, you will gain some knowledge, insight, and information about things that are valuable to you, much more beyond accountability though. Like to actually know, okay, when I'm doing this in my classroom, I know because I have data, because I have good sort of multiple sources of data that can point me to the direction of saying, now I know it's working, and that's good information for me. Okay, I want to talk just very briefly about a couple terms here for choosing an evaluator. I would say, first of all, you should find somebody who you can work with. That's important, right? If you're working with somebody, again, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's somebody that's a referral, but if they're not responsive, like they only show up to a meeting every 6 months, that's bad practice. You should definitely talk to their references, current clients or former clients. You should try to, we often, I would say 95%, maybe more than that, my work is all word of mouth. That's what we get referrals from people who have worked with us before or who have heard about somebody else, and so that's really how it works. So you should try to get a good sense from one of your colleagues who maybe work with somebody that they would recommend. That's who you should maybe try to target or interview, and talk to a couple different people too, because you may just find like working style maybe more appropriate in another scenario, so, or what they give you too. So that's kind of an important process. Be happy to talk more about that later if you want some information. In terms of the stakeholders, so evaluations, I'm going to talk about evaluation and research in a second, but we have to kind of think about, like in the Harvey Mudd study, okay, who are our main stakeholders in that study? And we're defining stakeholders as someone with a stake in the results of the evaluation. So let's get some ideas here. Who are the stakeholders? Students, okay? The students participated in the process. They're stakeholders. So give you an example. Maybe it was a great learning experience, but it was such a politically infeasible thing to do on campus, and it caused so much uproar in students that that's really good information for the evaluation. Maybe it had a really positive learning effect, but you have to consider the needs of that stakeholder group and saying, I recommend that this is a good idea because you don't want to have, mutiny on behalf of the students, right? So that's one good example. Who are other stakeholders? What do you say? Faculty, exactly, right? So because they're the ones doing all the work, prepping the lectures, doing the assignments, right? How do we modify what they're doing? It's more prep. It is more work, as you probably have guessed by now, right? So they are stakeholders. So again, a faculty experience, maybe it's a really great experience for them because they feel like, I'm teaching better than I ever had. I can do sort of best practices, but maybe it's so much work that, they're all on, medical leave because they're stressed out, right? That's obviously a negative side effect, so that's something you want to assess. Who are other stakeholders in this scenario? How are we running? Administrators, right? So what would administrators have a stake in the results of a study like this for?
Well, it could be depending on who the administrator is. So if it was like an IT admin, it could affect the technology that's in the room.
Right.
If it was like a lab administrator, like some teaching excellence type administrator, they may be interested in how they're training their faculty or what their faculty are doing in terms of teaching.
Right.
Or if I'm like a department head, I may be interested in saying, like giving tips for faculty in teaching, or maybe giving my faculty some extra time so they can develop a course or access on
right.
or ED. So it kind of depends who that administrator.
Great, great examples of their needs, right? Because you would want to know, and again, when you're setting an evaluation, you want to consider the perspectives of multiple stakeholder groups, right? Not just NSF funded the study, now we got to give them some data, but you really have to think about each person in this sort of chain or the level of the project to be able to say, okay, we're considering your needs, or maybe asking questions, how can administrators benefit from this information, how can faculty, etc. Versus the audience, and the audience I would say is just someone who doesn't have a specific stake in that evaluation, but who might benefit from the knowledge, like all of you in the room, right? Yeah, you're an all-in audience, right? Because you're interested in knowing what other people have done, how they've made it successful or not, and then, how you can apply it to your own situation. One thing I wanted to just clarify real quick that I didn't do yesterday that I really feel like we need to. So there's this world of no chalk. There's a world of no chalk. Thanks. There's a world, I'll go over here. I wrote this briefly on the board yesterday when we were in our other session, but so if you think about evaluation like being this whole big circle, and then there's this other thing called research, right? There's some overlap between evaluation and research, right? Not all research is evaluation, vice versa, okay? But there's also these sort of sub areas like measurement, okay, which is another entire discipline and field of like validating instruments and that sort of thing, right? And there's this other kind of subfield which is called assessment. So one of the things I first train my clients to do is a new client will call and say, well, needs an assessment person. You don't need an assessment person. You need an evaluator. An evaluator includes assessment, but it's not an interchangeable term. Okay, assessment is specifically related to if I'm using a self-efficacy assessment, that's the assessment I'm using, right? How can I best measure student attitudes towards STEM? That's an assessment issue. But a broader issue about all these other things that we're talking about is really about evaluation. So just so you can sort of know, if you've heard people, you've probably often either used it yourself or heard people say that they're not interchangeable, just so you're clear on the distinction between those things. But there are multiple subfields that also overlap. Okay. How are we doing so far? Questions yet? No? Okay. We're flying through lots of stuff very quickly, so just want to make sure. Okay. Real briefly, this is not my slide. This is another colleague of mine, Holly Russell. And there is a difference between research and evaluation. So if you think about, so for most of you who have done your own academic research, right, and the goal is essentially either to test a theory, right, to generate some kind of knowledge, to be able to, work on your research agenda, right? And this is all the purpose of research, being led by the researcher, essentially, right? You have hypotheses that essentially associated with your research. The goal is to publish results, right? Get tenure, right? All these things combined together. The methods you would use for that research are going to be very similar in social sciences anyway, and not necessarily in chemistry or biology or physics, but in social science research, the methods are going to be very similar, but the purposes and how we get there in evaluation are going to be very different. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not about my agenda of what I want to do, like it would be a research agenda. My agenda is satisfying what a client wants to know, what the stakeholders want to know about, as opposed to something I'm interested in myself. We want to use the information we gather for decision making about it. Is it good? Is it bad? Should it be funded? Should it be scaled back? Should it be scaled up? Etc. So those are distinctions to make the purpose of doing the evaluation. And we really want to make our recommendations based on key questions, and we want to start there. Okay. Very briefly, some designs that we want to think about. My recommendation is you really, again, we'll go through the process of how we usually do this first, but the design shouldn't come first, much like the method shouldn't come first, okay? What should really come first is the need, which is maybe students don't have good comprehension of very sophisticated organic chemistry concepts or something, right? How can we address that need? We may address that need by doing some kind of flipped model. But you don't want to first start with, and you can do that in many ways in integrated many designs, you don't want to start with the design, you really want to start with the need, which we'll get to in a minute. So essentially, like in any other kind of social science research, you can do different levels of design, which are considered rigorous or not rigorous, depending on what it is. So experimental designs, the key distinction being, of course, that you're randomly assigning individuals to conditions, okay? So randomized control trials are sort of examples of this, right? Where you have students or faculty or schools, or it could be at different levels, it doesn't necessarily have to be the individual level, but you're basically saying an equal probability of being in the group, okay? Basic random experimental design. Below that, or this sort of next level, quasi experimental designs. So the MUD study, for example, was that they had a control group and a treatment group, okay? Or a active learning classroom and a classroom. That is, when you have a control group, that's essentially quasi-experimental design. There's different ways of selecting that control group, but other types of design, like time series analysis, do you guys know what that is? Time series, okay, we have data across multiple times. So often they'll use this in policy studies, so they implement a statewide policy in California. I always use the example smoking in restaurants. For those of you who live in California in the 90s, at some point, I think it was 94, they stopped having smoking allowed in restaurants, and so they got public health information that kind of tracks, okay, what was sort of the incidence of disease and cancer and these other things that happened prior to, and then they have this policy at one point, and then they can see what happens as a result of implementing the policy. So you necessarily can't have a control group, right, in that kind of design, but you at least have some way of assessing that change over time. Okay. There's different kinds of quasi-experimental designs we'll talk about, but anything that essentially does not have a control group, we consider a non-experimental design. So any kind of correlational studies that we want to do are non-experimental. Case study designs are essentially non-experimental. Anything that's like a high qualitative type of study would be non-experimental generally, although you can use qualitative data in experimental studies and so on. But the design should be sort of selected after you figure out which methods and other questions that you want to answer. Yeah?
So sometimes you don't have two parallel sections that you can compare like you did in line.
Right.
And that, of course, is taught once a year or once a term. That kind of muddles things quite a bit because you're not really sure what else is happening in the interim.
Exactly, yeah.
Any comments on that?
Well, so that it would be, so if you have a very small sample size, for example, and you only have like one section of one course, it's going to be impossible to be able to have any kind of adequate control comparison group to that. It's possible you could do, you know, if you have two sections, and in your case, would you have like two sections to compare? Not, you would just have one?
One per.
Right, so I would say, well, starting out, I would do a heavy qualitative study, and I would say, all right, we're going to gather as much information as we can in terms of, I would do pre-post, at least to see learning gain, you know, from beginning to end, to demonstrate that there are actually gains, and to kind of measure instruments too. And then it would do lots of qualitative data about what would student experiences, faculty experiences, et cetera, because you, absent that comparison group, you really can't. You also may want to, if it's possible, it's not a great design, but you could maybe have a colleague at another institution who has a similar thing, you know, do some kind of comparison that way, assuming you could do like an initial, it's demonstrated that the students are fairly equivalent at the beginning, so there's a couple ways of getting around it, but without that, it's very hard to do. Because, you know, term to term, too, it's going to be funny, too. You know, you can have two different sections in one semester, and they're totally different because you've got different students who kind of have the old path. Yeah.
We also have faculty in situations like that that do like traditional for the first half of the class and then after collaborative for the second half of the class.
Yeah.
So it's not perfect, so you're not able to compare content versus content, but you're able to compare learning gains from learning gains.
Yeah.
So if you have measurable objectives and you're kind of assessing the whole thing, that's something that you can do or flip part of your class but not the whole thing.
That's a really good idea and a great suggestion because, and that's something actually this semester we're doing, just a module. It's not even a class, so you can test that particular module, which, you know, you can make an argument it may or may not be conducive to more of a flipped, you know, scenario versus others, but that's something you definitely try, like a couple, and I would do it a couple different ways. I would do like, you know, flip for this quarter of the class, you know, whatever, this, like Daryl said yesterday, they're doing a couple different things. They're going to do really focus on flipped and then not others. So that's a really good suggestion of doing, not the whole thing, just sections of it, and you can test. Then you can have really clean content tests too for each of those sections. Okay, so examples of methods again, quantitative thing, obviously anything numeric, right? Quantitative surveys, other kinds of assessments, content assessments, again, there's lots of self-efficacy in STEM or other types of assessment like that. You can find that are really good, valid, reliable instruments. My suggestion, don't reinvent the wheel. Try to find something that's an established, valid instrument. If you want to get into the whole measurement assessment game, it's a whole other discipline. There's probably people who can help you with that, but you want to try as much as possible to be able to have something that's already established. Obviously, if it's relevant to you, what you're doing. Qualitative data, again, often will supplement any kind of quantitative data with qualitative, which turns out to be an extended study. So again, observing what's happening, getting student feedback via other open-ended surveys or observations, talking to them later, focus groups, talking to professors, individual interviews that you could do, that's all. And again, mixed is just a combination of those. Okay, other quick things to know. Difference between formative and summative. Have you heard these terms before? Summative evaluation, formative? Okay. Do you know the difference between them? Anybody?
How do you go over them?
Well, why don't I go over them? Sure, okay. The difference is the purpose of why you're doing the evaluation. So formative means you're trying to get information for improvement, essentially, right, to tweak it, and that's what you would generally do initially, right? So if you're doing flipped for the very first time, you want to frame things in terms of we're doing a formative evaluation because we don't know, this is very first time out the gate, we want to collect lots of information so we can improve the process later before we say it worked or not. Okay, so think early tweaking, program improvement type of purpose versus summative, which is saying, okay, after it's been in place, we've got a really good study going, we can determine overall if it worked or not, have, determination of merit or worth. That's more summative, that's more final, and that's saying, okay, we're going to make a decision about it in terms of funding more, or expanding, or something else. So it's really the purpose. Often people talk about process evaluation versus outcome evaluation. So think about these in terms of processes is really about like implementation, right? So we want to say, all right, how was it done, right? What did the actual flip look like? What did they do? Versus outcome, which is how were the results as a result of what they did, right? How were the learning gains or how the attitudes, et cetera. And then impact, normally, especially in like a shorter study of like, let's say you're doing a 2 or 3 year study, the impact is really about those longer term gains, right? So if we're saying we want students to understand STEM concepts, not just to be able to get good grades or stay in their major or be retained in college or graduate from college, but ultimately we want them to be, good graduate students. We want them to be, good productive employees, good, productive members of society, or, have the knowledge to be able to do all these longer term things. That's impact. And often we would sort of assume that impact. We wouldn't necessarily measure that impact with an evaluation unless you have a really long time frame that you're working in. But that's really sort of the longer term thing. But again, regardless, you should really kind of spell that out and kind of be specific about what do you expect that long-term impact to be, because it'll kind of guide you in your choice of measurement before that. Again, this is eval.org plug for the American Evaluation Association. More information on there. Okay. So here's generally how we would do it. We would identify the need, as I mentioned earlier. So for all of you who are interested in higher education in STEM, bless you, the need is probably something along the lines of you want students to learn some kind of content, whether it's physics content or chemistry or engineering, whatever that is. Can somebody else give me an example of a need? What other need would we be addressing?
To retain underrepresented students.
Okay.
In the STEM fields.
Okay, so we're saying the need is that we've got a huge dropout rate of underrepresented minorities in STEM. And what we want to do ultimately is be able to address that so we keep them in STEM, for example. Okay, so that would be a different kind of need than just we want kids to learn the content. We want to have some other goal. Okay. So we want to be able to base our program plan or intervention activities specifically on that need. So we're all kind of coming to this conference thinking, okay, well, we have the thing we're doing, the activity, the solution, the inverted, the flipped model, right? But we really want to make sure that aligns well with what the need is. Okay, so let's assume that we've identified our need and we've addressed the fact that, well, I'm going to make an assumption here that my flipped classroom model is going to actually address that need. Fine, fair assumption to make. Now let's develop some evaluation questions of what we want to know about that. So I want to go through a couple. What are some questions that you would want to know the answer to in your flipped classroom, in your situation? What do you want to know?
So there are two things.
Okay.
In this case, if I'm doing so I'm looking at this from a course perspective, not from the program or some kind of proposal or funding I have. I'm not looking at that perspective.
Okay.
So there are two things. Whether I'm evaluating the whole course at the end, including all the assignments and all whatever work I have assigned, so that's one. Probably that would fit over here. But I'm also looking for individual assignments, or individual work, like video or anything I have assigned to students. How do you do that? So it's more like assessment from that.
Okay, so what do you want to, okay, let's take it back a step though. So what do you want to know about your flipped classroom?
Whether it worked or not.
Okay, whether it worked or not. Okay, and when we say worked, we're gonna operationally define stuff now. So when you say worked, what do you mean by worked? What does work mean to you?
So there has to be a reference point for that.
Right,
Right.
that's what I'm asking you to, just
So-
out on the limb here.
Right. Reference point has to be previous offering, which was non-flipped. Right.
Okay, so you're saying control group, well, I'm saying, okay,
Well, it's not really control group. Let's say I feel like a class this semester. I have no data. I never thought before that I'm going to feel like a class. So I don't want to have any previous data.
okay.
I may have anecdotal evidence, so I may have some performance data.
So this is where I want to go with this. Okay, so when you say performance data, right, that's the evidence that something worked, right? Now, what is that? What is the performance data? Can you give me an example?
Well, an example is the grading.
Okay. Score an
That's the easy
exam.
one.
Yeah, I'm trying to, yeah, so score an exam. It's like sort of mastery of content, would you say that?
Right.
Like you want them to learn these concepts. Okay, that's where it was pushing you to. So yeah, so exactly. So we want to know, did students in the flipped classroom learn more via higher grades or, mastery on some kind of performance assessment or whatever related to this content in the flip, in comparison to the control group or the non-flip or something. Okay, that's where I was going. Great example, yes.
Back to the niche you brought up.
Yep.
I guess the question I would have is do students feel like they belong? Do they feel like they're
Okay,
good at this sort of stuff?
excellent.
Yeah, confidence level.
Sure.
Great question for women in engineering, right? We know this, right, based on lots of research literature. So we want, maybe the need is to allow students to feel more confident in the skills that they've acquired or a sense of belonging in their field, in STEM or the particular field or subfield or something like that. Maybe something that we noticed that we have a deficit in, that's what we want to address with our intervention or class. Okay, great. Okay, yes.
One more thing.
Sure.
At freshman level course, another issue is retention. Whether this kind of flipped classroom is going to motivate students to be in the major.
Right.
So retention rate, I don't know about California, but North Carolina, the funding, public university funding is dependent on the retention as well.
Okay,
So that is now big.
right. We want to keep them in. If they decide they want to be a STEM major, we want them to stay STEM. Right, exactly. So that would be another evaluation question. Do those students who participated in the flipped classroom model, are they retained at higher rates than students in the alternative? Or if everybody's doing flipped, is the overall retention rate better than it was previously? And can we make the connection between what we're doing and then the sort of attribution of the result? Right, okay, so we want to do that. We want to develop our evaluation questions. And out of those evaluation questions necessarily become the measures that we want to use, right? Well, if we're looking at retention in STEM majors, we're going to look at retention rates, clearly, right? We're going to look at, if we're looking at graduation, if we're looking at belongingness or confidence in STEM, well, we definitely need a belongingness or confidence in STEM measure that we're integrating into the evaluation, right? If our question is, well, did they just perform better? We've only got one key question, which is, did they get higher mastery of the concepts or did they get better grades? That's what we have to look at. So you can make it as specific or as broad as you want, but you should start with what do we want to know, and then have measures and methods that coincide with that process, right? This is completely logical, right? Unfortunately, some people start with the, I've got this really great survey I want to use, now where I'm going to sort of apply it, and that's sort of the wrong approach, right? Because it doesn't start with what question do we want to know the answer to. Maybe you can make something up, but we want to start with what the actual conceptual thing that we want to understand, develop the questions, then develop measures, then determine the design. Now this is kind of tricky too because, you know, maybe, again, the best way to test it is like doing this experiment, right? We're gonna randomly assign people, whatever, but maybe it's not feasible to do. Maybe it's a lot of logistical work. Maybe, again, there's the culture of the college is not conducive to having people in different groups because they study together so much, whatever it is. So we want to be able to say, okay, well, what's the best design that we can get for the resources that we have, for how feasibility or context, you know, is, et cetera. So, and then you do the analysis based on what you developed as the plan. Are you with me? Sound good? Piece of cake, right? All right. So we usually start with a logic model when we try to map these things out to go through an evaluation plan. So I'm going to have Nancy talk a little bit about the logic models and kind of get take the temperature of your knowledge and experience with them, and then we're going to go through each of you. We're going to go through an example of a logic model, and we're going to work on your plan. So go ahead, Nancy.
Okay. So who here has used or seen or thought about a logic model? Great. We're going to start at the beginning. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So logic models, as Rebecca mentioned, are kind of where we start. And they're basically, we use them as a visual to understand why we're moving from point A to point Z in your program or your project or whatever. And what are the steps that have to happen in between in order for what you think will happen to occur. And so they're just a way for you to understand the logical connections that are coming out of activities, and then they help to identify also what you think is important and how to measure those things. So, in a logic model, the common elements are called inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and then assumptions and external factors. And so Rebecca is passing out several sheets for you. And so included in this little packet, we have some terms that are frequently used in evaluation defined. We have 2 different blank versions of a logic model template that you can look at, and then there's one that has much more specifics filled in there. And the last thing that's on there are those frequently asked evaluation questions, which she mentioned earlier, which those are not necessarily all related to logic models, but that's included as well. So do we want to start with, okay, anyway. So the logic model resources in those packet are from the University of Wisconsin, which is one of the biggies when it comes to logic model resources. They have a huge guide available on their website for you to look at, including really detailed explanations of each step of what a logic model is and what goes where. And then the Kellogg Foundation is the other big one in terms of resources for logic model development. So these are kind of awkward links, but if you Google either of those names, they should come up for you. So in its simplest form, here's a logic model. So our need that we have is we have a headache. Our input is we're going to get pills. Output, we take these pills, and then our desired outcome is that we're going to feel better. So this is a very, very basic logic model that we're going to think about. But Rebecca is actually going to take us through an example of one that is for a program which we've worked with, and then we're going to go into getting you to think about each of these elements for your particular situation.
Great. Okay, so again, look at the terms at the very beginning. Again, I'm going to kind of force the issue of need, though. So think about in your particular circumstance, and then we'll apply to this example. So what kind of need are we addressing? And this is something, again, another higher ed program that we worked with. Students lack experiences outside the classroom that prepare them for the world of work. Okay, so for those of you who have undergraduate students who generally, won't move on to graduate school, who just finish their degree, we understand often that they're not prepared to just go into the workforce, right? They need different kinds of out-of-classroom experiences to be able to be ready for this. So that's really our need we're trying to address. So you can kind of think of, well, what are some things that we would do to be able to prepare students for the world of work? So let's give some examples. What would you recommend as an undergraduate scenario? What would you say better prepare students? Yeah? Internship, perfect, yep. Anything else? Yes.
Programming skills.
Programming skills, okay. So that they may not acquire in the classroom, let's say, for example.
Field studies, field trips.
Oh, okay, yeah, other kind of applied experiences outside the classroom that they wouldn't necessarily get as part of the course. Perfect, okay. So in this week, we actually are doing the internship part, which is great. All right, so we think about if we're going to do an internship program, what kind of resources do we need? Right, we often need like someone to kind of coordinate the internship, right? You can't just have them sort of randomly go out to job sites. Often there's kind of liability issues and other things happening, right? So we need maybe staff, we need a building or some kind of office to be able to do it. We need some materials, we need some kind of guidelines or curricula to be able to do this. So we're going to think about the inputs as things that we need in preparation to do the program or do the intervention, right? So the next one, we think about, all right, well, what do we need to do? What activities are planned to address the need? Well, if we say they need to do an internship, maybe we need to really define that. It's not just any internship, and it's not just for 3 hours on a weekend, right? We need to say, let's be really specific. Students attend internships for 10 hours a week for 12 weeks. Okay, now we're defining who's doing it. Maybe it's the upper division class that they're doing it within, but it's for chemistry majors that are doing a particular thing for X number of hours a week and doing at some kind of site. So we're being very specific about defining this. Who's doing it, when they're doing it, how much, what's the dosage, right? So if I say I'm going to take a Tylenol to get rid of my headache, maybe for me, I know I need like 2 extra strength Tylenols. That's enough of a dosage for me, versus Nancy only needs 1 regular Tylenol or something, right? So we have to understand a little bit about mechanics here, like what's the dosage that should be adequate to be able to see some kind of effect. All right, so we want to spell that out, and then we want to say, well, we're going to very carefully monitor this implementation. Remember we said at the beginning there's implementation questions that we were asking, right? We were tracking. That's what you're tracking here. You're saying, is it done with high quality? Is it a good internship, right? Is it done with fidelity? Are students actually showing up for the 10 hours for 12 weeks, or are they just sort of showing up whenever they want to? So that's what we're trying to answer in the evaluation. And then we're saying, we presume that these things are going to lead to some short-term and perhaps some longer-term outcomes, right? So for example, we want to spell out, okay, well, we want students to acquire technical skills, maybe networking, maybe some other things that they didn't get, that they wouldn't have got without the internship in place. And then we expect those things to lead to longer-term outcomes, such as finding employment or being prepared to be an employee after graduation. Make sense? Okay, so this is where we're going to ask you to be really, really specific, and I want you to think about your own situation and really spell out what you're going to do. So I'm going to ask you to take out, as an example, we're going to use this first template, which is, again, very basic. There's different formats, and I meant to do a little tricked up because sometimes people put participation under different columns and outputs. We're going to use this one as sort of the basic, and then you can certainly vary from there. There's lots of good resources on them. This one's a little more complicated because it actually shows like arrows and how things are related to each other. We'll save that for another time, but essentially we're going to use this right now. Okay, so I want you to go through, Nancy, if you want to turn to the next slide. Oh, the other thing I didn't talk about, what's also necessary to spell out are a couple other things, which are assumptions and external factors. So external factors are things you have no control over, right? There was a massive hurricane and completely wiped out your biology labs or something. I mean, that is something completely out of your control. It's nothing to do with the quality of your implementation of your program that you have nothing to do with. Economy's bad, and so nobody can get a job anyway. Even if they're really prepared, nobody's hiring. Okay, stuff like that. That's external factors. You should kind of put in there to consider, but basically you're saying these things are kind of out of our control. Assumptions, though, are things like, okay, well, maybe the assumption is that students are actually going to be able to acquire the technical skills during the internship to then be able to be employable. Okay, we're making an assumption about that. We're also making an assumption that students increased confidence in their skill set is actually going to lead to other longer-term gains academically, as opposed to just their feelings of they feel great about themselves, right? It's going to have some other complementary effect. Anyway, think about that. One thing too, before we do, there's a big difference between outputs and outcomes, and often if we meet with new clients, they're very stuck on this concept of outputs. So they're saying, well, here's our goals. 100 students, 20 hours a week, 4 faculty trained, and 10 workshops or something. And we say, oh, that's really great. You've got like goals for what you expect to happen, but it has nothing about what they expect that to result in, right? Again, what we're talking about in terms of what I'm kind of pushing for is if it's student learning gains, that's an outcome, right? If it's attitude change, that's an outcome, so that we want to really clarify. Go to the next one. Very distinct difference. Look at the first one, crime control. So outputs are like hours of patrol, number of responses to calls, number of crimes investigated, arrested, right? That's all really good, publicly available data or statistics that we would say, oh, our police department's doing a really good job. But really what we expect that to lead to, though, are those outcomes, like an actual reduction in crime, reduction in deaths or injury or something like that. So that's what we want to say. What is the actual effect? What is the outcome that's happening? So make sure we're specifying both of those. Okay, so in your template, get a pen if you don't have one available. We're going to start with our need. So at the very top, you're going to say, here's our situation or our need. Okay, and I want you to be as specific as you possibly can. So if you're thinking about teaching I'm going to pick on you. What is the name of the class?
That's a program.
Programming class. So it's like computer science, okay, 405 or whatever it is, right? So, or whatever. 1 or 2, perfect, okay, great. It was a random guess, okay. So, students in, whatever, computer programming 102, you have a feeling that they lack adequate mastery over the concepts in the current format or something like that, or they're not learning what they need to be learning, whatever it is. So, be very specific about what this is. Okay, so think about that for a minute, and then we're actually going to start with, in the program, which you can fill in up here, we call that the evaluand, right? Anything that's being evaluated is the evaluand, whether it's a program or whatever intervention it is. And then we're going to start with, we're going to start with this category right here, the second one, which is activities. Okay, so we want to go through one example. We don't want to do a full explicit logic model for every single step, but I want you to think about one thing. Okay, so what is your one part of your intervention that you're going to do? And if it is, you're going to flip your classroom, and then you want to give some details about, which means that students are going to watch videos before they attend class, or students are going to work together on these projects inside of class, or professors are going to do more active learning exercises with class time instead of lecture something. So be as specific as possible about those activities. So what are you doing? So that's that second column right there. After you define that, what you're doing, the next column is called participation. And that's really who is doing this, right? Who's participating in this? And for most of you, it's going to be undergraduate students, right? Or maybe you get specific in saying, physics majors or something like that. But be fairly specific about who is participating, okay? And some of the dosage. It's going to be a 1-semester course, or it's going to be their junior level chemistry course, or whatever it is. So be as specific as possible in participation and then activities. And then after that, you can kind of map out what's needed for that. So often, and that's the inputs column, often that's like, we need faculty, we need a curriculum, we need, maybe grant funding to support this, whatever that is. So that's going to be the inputs category. All right, so I'm going to kind of walk you through this for a minute. So let me give everybody a few minutes to work on describing activities and participation, and then we're going to go on to the outcomes part in a second. So Nancy and I will be around to answer questions, but I'll give you just a few minutes to do that, and then we'll move on. Let me know if you
The students and the faculty.
So students is one level and faculty. So let's define participation a little bit more. Is it a semester course?
Yeah, I wrote down freshman calculus.
Okay, freshman calculus students, perfect, okay, great. Generally non-major students, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
STEM majors.
Okay. You can define it even further if you'd like. The more you do in this sort of preparation and defining here, then obviously the more specific you can be with evaluation questions and, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's totally fine. And then you have some, looks like you've got some things.
Yeah, I
related
mean, I
to-
just described what flipped classroom or active learning classroom looks like.
Okay, so some of the things that you will include in that.
Yeah.
Perfect, okay, great. And then you can work on this one. What's required to do that?
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on? Yeah, we don't have to fill out this whole thing. We're not going to do a full, again, you could sort of have an idea though, going back to this template. You know, you can have a couple different activities that all affect the same level of participation. So in this template, it might be, here are the things for students, and then here are the things for faculty. So faculty may be like professional development for faculty, or, you know, release time or something like that, leading to and then the faculty participation, which may be differentiated from student participation. Okay, so think about it like that. And then we want to say, after we've got at least one example here, something that you're doing, right, and who's participating, then we want to say, okay, what are the short-term outcomes you expect? And maybe we should have a discussion about this too. So what are some short-term outcomes that you expect to see in your students who are taking the class? Yeah.
They're more interactive, they're less shy, they're more focused on communicating teamwork done together.
Perfect, great example. Okay, so you can say we expect the immediate outcome to be that students are more engaged with the material, let's say they're working collaboratively better, and they are able to, you know, what do you say, more focused on the assignment or something like that, right? Okay, so that would be a short-term outcome. We're saying, again, that's not sort of the long-term prize that we're aiming for, but it's a short-term outcome that will happen. We assume that if this is done right, students will be more engaged. Okay, so you could do like student engagement, that's a short-term outcome. And let's think about, in selecting an evaluation instrument, what would be a way of measuring student engagement? How do we measure it?
You have to be much of an observation, you just observe.
You could observe that, and that is one completely acceptable method of evaluation, to observe. You could say, okay, well, I'm going to have people observe in the flipped classroom this assignment, or, you know, this series or whatever, and then we're going to have them observe something similar in a non-flipped classroom, and we'll see the level of student engagement, or before and after or something. It could be, you know, when they're doing the non-flipped part of it and then the flipped part. So that would be, an observation is certainly one way. What's another way of maybe measuring student engagement? Huh?
Survey.
Survey, okay, so you can ask students, okay? How much did you, you know, enjoy working with the other students in your class, right? How much do you feel like you worked well together as a group? Or some other thing related to, you know, working with other students or something, right? You can also ask professors to rate the level of engagement. That's something, again, maybe they're not going to be very objective about it, but it is one source of data, okay? And in evaluation, we like to have like multiple sources of data to kind of triangulate to make one decision about, as opposed to having just one source of data for everything that we're trying to know. So that would be something. Okay, so we're going to have, so think about what that short-term outcome is going to be, and I would do a little side note for yourself, maybe a possible way to measure that. What's a possible evaluation instrument or method that we could use? And then this one has room for medium-term outcomes. again, it can be as specific or not specific as you want. We can maybe hypothesize about what a medium-term outcome. So assuming students are more engaged, right, assuming they're working better together, what do we expect that to result in?
Maybe increased confidence in their own abilities.
Okay, increased confidence in their own abilities, right? They're working together better. We assume that something else is happening in parallel, which is that they're learning the content better, okay? And maybe both of those things are causing an impact on their confidence level, okay? Great example, okay? But this is exactly what you have to do to be really explicit about what do we think is happening, okay? And if you think something's happening and your colleague who's doing it thinks something else is happening, that's exactly the purpose of using the logic model, because then you can come to the decision point about, well, let's be explicit about what we think the logical relationship is here, and if not, we need to kind of work out what the chain of logic is. Okay, and then let's assume then that's leading to what ultimately? What's a longer term outcome in this example that might be feasible?
In my case, maybe some students who would have normally dropped out of the calculus sequence will stay.
Okay.
More calculus courses.
Great example. Okay, so we expect to see then if they're more engaged and they're more confident and they're learning more, ultimately they're not going to drop out. They're going to be retained in the class or in the major or something like that. Great example of a longer term outcome. Okay, and again, you can kind of think about retention in STEM or retention in field or, graduation rates or something like that. It could be like those longer term outcomes. Exactly. Okay, so again, we're not going to have you go through a full logic model kind of experience, but at least this is one way of being able to set up the structure of the sort of theory of change of your program and be able to say then, okay, what kind of questions do we want to answer as a result of that? Does the flipped classroom model impact students' confidence, right? Because it's already here, right? Does the flipped classroom model have a better, a more beneficial impact on students, collaborative work groups or something, right? Or does it cause change in retention rates for those who do flip versus not? Okay, so those are all well defined here. But again, you have something in your model that just sort of, while we think it's really about, connection to the school, well, maybe that's something that you need to test as opposed to it just being maybe a side effect of participating. So okay. Yeah.
Just one question. So
Sure.
Response to outcome questions are basically are based on the data being collected from surveys or maybe performance in different course assignments. So outcome is not hardcore data basically. It's the explanation of the data.
Outcomes are hardcore data. And I'm going to go back to the evaluation.
That was the output.
The output is more of accounts of things, right? The output is how many students did it. So let me go back to our evaluation questions, Nancy, at the very beginning, the argument. It knocked it off. Oops, I think we lost it. Oh no. Okay, go back to our evaluation questions. All right, so I want you to look at these. So again, those are our evaluation questions. The first two evaluation questions were really related to this, okay? Because our activity is we want students to spend more time doing these kinds of tests with instructors. That's part of what's the assumption about the inverted classroom, that they're spending more time doing these meaningful active learning things.
These are activities.
What
is highlighted in red?
I'm just giving you, the first two bullets are related to implementation, so it's really about this. So, and then did they actively participate, prepare for class? So that's what we want to know about here. Well, we assume that the activities include students participating actively, preparing for class, working on meaningful tasks. That's all right here. Again, how much of that, what dosage, how frequently they do it is defined in participation, but that's here. And then the last four bullets are all related outcomes. So we're saying, do they have higher learning gains? That's maybe a a longer-term outcome or a medium-term outcome, right? Did they apply materials to new situations? Because we have the hypothesis that doing these things will allow them to have better metacognitive skills, better transfer. Those are maybe short or medium-term outcomes. Ultimately, then, do they learn more? And then faculty experiences is really related to this question of, okay, the faculty is down here, right? The student stuff is up here. Maybe the faculty, what are their experiences? And if they're saying, well, gosh, you know, it's 35 hours a week to prepare one lecture, you know, that's what we're saying, you know, what is the impact on faculty? Okay, so maybe we have some other questions related to, you know, do they have better, you know, teaching strategies now or something, right? So that's something else we can ask. But basically, you can separate into implementation questions, which are more here, and then outcome questions, which are more here. Great question, though. That's how you would generally think about it, at least. Okay. We've been through pretty much everything we want to know. I'd be happy to answer other questions about evaluation or your specific program. Or we can even give you some, like I said, some Q&A, which are some topics that we think are probably important to consider. But burning questions about your program. When you walked in here and said, I want to know X, what can we help you answer? Yes?
It's maybe too ambiguous.
Okay.
I have a bunch of numbers and spreadsheets.
Okay.
So what makes data good?
What makes data good? Well, knowing what those are, right? So can you give me an example of the type of data they are?
So I flipped my intro class last semester completely. And
Okay.
so I have data from that semester on exam scores, final exam, which is common with all instructors at my college.
Okay.
And then I have data from the last 5 years that I was teaching at the same school. So
Okay.
I have like the kind of before and after.
Got it. So almost like a time series, we're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And
Okay.
so, my interest is trying to figure out, did this flipping help them? I mean, I saw a shift in distributions and things. I don't produce tests, and so, some tests are harder than others, and so that's not
Okay.
a constant. But in terms of the numbers, how can we, look at the numbers and say, like, look, this data is good enough to support, showing to my team that, look, this thing is working, we should.
Right. So if you have like final exam scores, that's let's assume that was your only source of data, right? And you were to say, okay, in year 1, here was the final exam score. Year 2, year 3, year 4, and you're sort of plotting that out because you can have means or whatever, or even standard deviations, whatever, showing distribution of scores, right? And then you can say, all right, what happened here? I mean, I presume I'm getting better at teaching every time I do it because that's, generally what happens over time, right? But when I did this, is this significantly better than what I've had in the past? And I have a hypothesis that it is because look at the exam. And again, it may not be, speaking of your stakeholders, maybe your dean needs a different level of evidence than that to be convinced that it's a better model. So you should probably find out kind of, what the expectation is for the kind of rigor of the kind of evidence that you're talking about. But I don't know if that's sufficient. It may be. I don't know. Have you looked at your data at all to see, is it significantly better?
In one way, there are less people that fail.
Okay, fewer people failed, okay?
But there are less A's and B's. There are a lot more C's this past semester. So it was kind of a mixed thing, I mean, the overall grade shifted differently, but in the final exam scores.
Right.
It didn't shift the way I was hoping it would, but there were less people.
Okay, so less people failed, but fewer people actually, so more people ended up sort of in the middle.
Yeah.
Now, because you had like more collaborative groups or something, or were they working together more
Yeah,
often?
they're doing a lot more group work and videos.
Okay, so again, if I were you and doing it again, I don't know that you have collected the level of evidence or data that you need to be able to make a strong argument. I would get lots of qualitative feedback from students too about what's happening.
And I did give a survey about the process and things like that.
Sure, okay, so that would probably provide some additional insight into, what kind of thing you think is happening here. I mean, maybe it's possible that the lower distribution is like sort of dragging down the upper distribution because they're forced to maybe work more collaboratively, so it's sort of bringing everybody more, together, and I don't know exactly what's happening, but you could certainly put the data together and then test it again. I don't know if it's sufficient, to be honest.
One of the things our faculty do in that situation is they don't just look at, and we warn them, don't just look at the final exam score or the overall grade distribution of the course, but take your final exam and relate questions back to overall learning objectives. And then if you're able to say, this exam question accomplished this learning objective I taught this way, you're kind of able to say, by inverting or flipping or doing something different, active collaborative, I was able to achieve this objective better than when I just lectured about it. And so and then two, if you just look at final exam scores or final grades across all different faculty, did a faculty member curve? Did you give the same exam? Did they give a different exam? So you're kind of introducing other data issues by just looking at like letter grades. And so it's really like diving into those letter grades and looking at them. And oftentimes it's really hard. You've got to get faculty together to look at common learning objectives. How are we going to assess those common learning objectives? Is there a common exam? So yes, having data is great, but it's really diving into that data and what does that really mean? And I can see where the logic model can really help understand what data is and what it means to you and to others.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah.
I said this yesterday when we were meeting, but I wanted to make a plug for the SALG survey, the student assessment of their learning gains. It's a nice instrument, it's been vetted, used a lot for sort of math ed research to understand, especially affective gains, but a lot of also how do the students think they understand each thing. You know, like you can see sort of you say, how well do you understand the concept of derivatives? Really well. Okay, not well at all. And so you can see that too from their own perspective. And I actually use that and look at that instead of my teaching evaluations because it's much more useful. Because it's less about do they like me as a person and more about sort of how they feel their experience benefited them and their education. And it's free and it has a wizard. So it has like different categories of questions that they have decided are important to address, but you can modify the questions in each category. So, so for example, when I flipped my class last semester, I said, how helpful are the videos? How helpful is the online homework? How helpful are the in-class quizzes, the group work? And so you can really break it down, and they say very helpful, not helpful at all, you know, like, but you can see a little bit of that. I mean, it's still, you know, their self-submitted and their experience, which might not actually line up exactly with how much they're learning, but it's really important to see what their experience is. And I actually started using it because in my sort of halfway through tenure review, they said, oh, you're doing all this active learning, it sounds great, but what is the student's experience, right? And then our college-wide evaluations didn't really address a lot of that because, you know, when the students are asked, like, how much did lecture help? I never lectured, right? And so they're like, not at all, you know, but then, I mean, are they still learning? Yes. Am I still teaching? Yes, I'm just not lecturing, right? And so, so the deans were like, well, how do the students feel about your active learning? So I decided to do this survey after that, and it was really helpful when I went up for tenure because I had all this data, and I was like, look, great, you know. And nobody questioned my teaching in that review, you know. So it's also a good way to appease the powers that be.
Yeah. It's a really great idea. And you know, hopefully there's nothing that prevents you from doing just a quick temperature check a couple weeks in. I used to always do this like midway through the semester. Okay,
yeah,
what's going well? What don't you like? Maybe the videos are, you know, not easily accessible, or there's technical problems or something else. Like what's working in their view right now? What's not working? What's working really well? What do you want more of, less, etc. So you can do a quick, even very open-ended, quick assessment before you're done with the class, a third of the way in, half the way in, to be able to do that. The other thing too to kind of think about, and for those technical experts in the room too, to kind of think about, well, we want to measure students like accessing the videos or something. Is there a way we can, through our IT department, set up how much students are actually watching the videos, assuming you're actually watching them when it's playing on the computer? You know, if there's a way of tracking that, that's a really great way of some of these assessment implementation questions, right? Related to how much they're actually doing what you think they're doing. You know, the self-report survey stuff's really good too, but there's another objective measure of how to get to that information about usability of stuff. That would be something to definitely include too. Great point, yes.
So I had a question about,
Yeah.
so can you comment on the do's and don'ts of a full control study if I ever want to plan a control study?
Yeah, do's and don'ts.
For example, if I want to use this
Yeah.
in my class and I want to evaluate at the end of it whether it really has or not, should I, like, how many sections should I do it on?
Yeah.
Statistically? And
I would get, my biggest recommendation to start any kind of process like this is do a pilot first. You gotta get the kinks worked out, you gotta get the procedure worked out, you gotta have a good understanding of, like sort of the benefits or drawbacks of what you're planning on doing. So once you get the model ironed out in the context of doing a pilot, like I wouldn't plan a control study from day one. I would do it a couple of times, test out some measures, test out some ideas of things that you think are happening, get lots of qualitative, lots of student feedback, lots of other stuff, and then I would say now you're ready for your more formal study of it. If you want to have a control group, there's ways of making sure that you've got an appropriately matched control group or an appropriate acceptable within a ranged control group. Yeah, thanks. And then I would say, assuming that's in place, your instrument's solid, obviously your questions are good, your instrument's solid, and then you're ready to actually do your study and then look at your data, or have somebody else objective look at your data and be able to give you some good feedback on that. Yeah. Yeah, but I would say, first and foremost, get the kinks worked out first. Good question. By the way, you can always follow up with us via email, or Twitter, to our website. There's other ways. Please, if there's even a quick question or something else you want to know, I'd be happy to speak with you about that. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
From maybe most of the people here, actually. I'm wondering if they are spending a lot of time preparing these flip classes. It apparently takes a lot of time. Actually, the effect, is it more helping them to be more organized? Because now they have to be prepared well in advance versus 2 hours before the lecture.
Right, okay.
I mean, that's typical.
Sure.
I used to do that.
Sure.
Is that really helping them in that regard or
right.
not? I mean,
well, and again, part of the argument is like once you do the video, especially if you're in a content area that's not going to change much, right? The core lecture maybe is going to be the same for this particular content area. Then it probably saves you time at some point. There's a crossover when you're doing
It's a
the
big
good stuff.
startup cost.
Yeah,
But the question,
it's a big initial investment, right?
The question I have is really helping you to become a better teacher in a way.
Well, that's a great evaluation question. Does the flip model help our faculty become better prepared or, better pedagogy or something? That's a great question, but maybe anybody who wants to speak to that can answer the question. Yeah. By the way, guys, thank you very much for attending today. So good to have you in here. Of course, follow up with